Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, who would ever doubt the marketing materials of a company? I mean, come on, surely it's wrong and improper to say that you're going to deliver something, to then open up pre-orders based on that, and then to proceed to not deliver that thing when you sell your product. Whew, well, tell that to Google and id Software, because we have a very interesting situation today. Now, if you're new here, then hello, we're a narrative game studio. Hit up our mailing list and site down below. We also do 6 game industry news and analysis videos per week, so sub for more of that, and like and comment if you want to help us out with that YouTube algorithm. It seriously does help. We thank you for it, and let's get into the video. Okay, so here's what's happened. id confirmed that Doom Eternal will actually not run at true 4K on Stadia. Instead, it's going to run at 1080p 60 on HD displays, and then will be upsampled to 4K from 1800p 60 FPS on 4K displays. Now, this news comes despite the repeated assertions from id Software that the game would be running at true 4K. That was a quote. Doom Eternal has been an essential title for Stadia since the beginning, right? It's what Google even used to demo that tech. It was supposed to be their big thing. Like, that their gaming poster child won't even be able to deliver what was promised and pre-orders were sold on pretty much means, oh yeah, they lied to everyone. Now, when Stadia was unveiled, id boss Marty Stratton said that Doom Eternal would push Stadia to the extreme. He said, if you're going to prove to the world that you can stream games from the cloud, what better proof than Doom? And he went on to say that id push every platform to its limits, and so that they were the perfect team to illustrate Stadia's robustness. Now, way back then at that show, Stratton promised that Eternal would run at, quote, well, at true 4K resolution with HDR color and an unrelenting 60 FPS. So, yeah, id's latest update shows that Stratton's comments prove to be less than true. His comments also, I think, raise an important point about Stadia's potential and what it is. He said that id aims to push every platform to its limit, which, I mean, is a valid enough statement to make. Absolutely, it's id after all. But with Doom Eternal unable to hit real 4K performance, which was promised on Stadia, does that mean that Stadia actually just can't handle it right now? If Stadia's 4K can only be achieved through upscaling or upsampling, then it does make their marketing extremely disingenuous, and it does call into question the actual power of that platform. I mean, yes, they could have everything sitting there in the cloud ready to go, but obviously Google are not deploying that to, each individual instance because, I mean, yeah, if they could throw a whole cloud cluster at it, they probably could get 4K. Overall, though, to me, what comes up here is legality, right? Like, at least here in the UK, like, we've got pretty strict, rules for advertisements, and I know that in the US, a lot of those rules are quite a bit more weak than they are here. So maybe that's what explains, Google playing fast and loose with that stuff. But, I mean, they said true 4K 60. They said that it would be there for titles at launch, and that's literally not happening, right? That, to me, is just false advertising, and they sold pre-orders on that, so they sold those pre-orders under false pretenses. It seems to me like that's the sort of thing that a class action lawsuit could actually come from. Now, I'm no legal expert, so I'm not making that as a legal claim or prediction, but it absolutely does seem fishy. I think we can all agree in that. Now, I do want to be clear here, does that mean that Doom Eternal will suck? No, it doesn't mean it'll suck. Upsampling 1800p to 4K is a lot better than upscaling, 1440p or 1080 or something like that. And if the game can maintain its promised 60 FPS, then it could perform decently well, though yes, still well short of what was actually promised. And that is a bad look for both id and for Google. They've been working together on this Stadia stuff for years. id apparently had, quite a lot of tech they were making for streaming, and they seem to be extremely passionate about the platform and pretty determined to make the most of it. So if id, who are incredible technologically, if they can't make 4K 60 work, then who can? As one Reddit user points out, if this is the case, then Stadia can, in a way, no longer blame devs over hardware. Now, to give you some context on that, Stadia made all of those really bold launch claims, right, that I just said seem barely like a true thing. Now, when they were called up on a lot of their claims, most of their claims not actually materializing in reality, they said that they just leave it up to the publisher and the developer to do what's there. But of course, at the end of the day, they sold people on a platform. They said that games on that platform would have, certain levels of quality that they would be reaching, and they obviously didn't. So I think this situation means that it just seems like it's less and less a thing that they can blame the devs and the publishers, and it just does fall to them. That's where the buck falls, right? They clearly, id were not able to get this game to run at 4K 60 on Stadia. They sold Stadia based on it doing literal, true, internal 4K 60. So, yeah, obviously, it's a terrible look for Stadia, and it really does make them seem very silly indeed for what they said. I mean, just to continue going on that point, Red Dead Redemption 2, another high-profile Stadia title, doesn't hit true 4K. Depending on the data rate, Red Dead Redemption 2 either renders in 1080p or 1440p and is then upscaled to 4K via the Chromecast Ultra. Then Destiny 2 also renders at native 1080p and then is upscaled to improve quality, but it never reaches the full 4K. And I mean, just look at Digital Foundry's coverage. It doesn't look good for Google. And I think Google's continued commitment to following the sort of minimum viable product standard with Stadia is really coming to bite them in the arse here. Google are well used to releasing incomplete shell products and letting their audience sort of tell them what they want. I think that works because Google are good at utilities, not really products. But this method doesn't really gel with the marketing of Stadia, right? They've advertised full 4K 60 with Stadia since the beginning, but have continuously failed to deliver on that. It's almost as if they advertised it, released Stadia without it, and that they're now seemingly surprised that people actually want the thing that they sold them on. And I think here when we really go into it, MVP, minimum viable product, that is a normal thing in the tech world. And if you look at what Google are really good at doing and what they're really bad at doing, they're pretty bad at platforms, I would say. I think they're pretty bad at products, but what I think Google are incredibly good at is utilities, right? Things that are just handy tools that you can use. So in that case, releasing the minimum version of a utility is a great way for the audience who actually cares about that utility to start using it and to give you really good real-world use case feedback. And that's wonderful. But that's entirely different from a consumer product where, at the end of the day, it does cost a bunch of money for you to actually get going with Stadia, especially for Stadia Pro. That means that you're expecting some sort of value in return, and that is just very different from the utility-like thing that Google usually do, because the whole point of utility is, even if it's, say, expensive, it helps you in your life or your work, as opposed to an entertainment product that you use to ideally enhance your free time. And it's in that context that I think Stadia really does fail and does show that Google kind of were just the wrong company to do this. I mean, in terms of their technical backend, yes, they're incredibly good at doing a whole bunch of internet stuff, obviously. But in terms of a company culture and a company's understanding of its customers and users, I think Google are clearly pretty weak. And I think Stadia really does highlight that. I mean, going back to the resolution thing, I think in the realms of not quite 4K performance, the PS4 Pro is probably the best comparison to Stadia, in my view. Very few PS4 Pro games run at native 4K, so titles are usually upscaled by the console itself. Now, the tech behind the PS4 Pro aims to give you those upscaled visuals that are supposedly hard to distinguish from native 4K. So with that, you've basically got the console tracking the edges of objects as they're being upscaled, and then geometry and checkerboard rendering working together to output greatly improved visuals. So geometry rendering is designed to make the edges of in-game objects appear more crisp, right, and more detailed, even though if you go past those edges, the actual object, remains at its native texture resolution, just native resolution, all that stuff. Checkerboard rendering works alongside the geometry stuff to basically change the shape of the pixels and using data from previous frames of the game to sort of fill in information gaps. Now, if this is all done correctly, then it can be quite challenging to tell the difference between 4K and the checkerboarded version. I mean, playing Uncharted 4, I was astounded how good that looked on the hardware it was running on. But I'd also say something really important here, and this almost is in Stadia's favor, actually, where we do a whole bunch of getting 4K 60 or, 8K 120 if we're going to go absolutely insane, where a lot of that's just counting specs, counting numbers, it's back-of-the-box spec sheet stuff. Even though at the end of the day, what actually makes a video game feel immersive and be really just engaging and like you're truly there in the scene, you know what, it's not actually resolution all the time. And this is where, as much as he's a bit of a controversial, sometimes bumbling, person, David Cage of Quantic Dream, I think was really quite right, where David Cage recently, it's probably not recent now, but he talked about how, say, lighting and ray tracing, things like that, are far more important for making a really good-looking game than just having some more pixels to play around with. And I think even if you, say, think about mobile phone cameras, you get some of these phone cameras with absolutely insane megapixel counts that get absolutely thrashed by a 12 megapixel sensor that's bigger, that has better color, right? At the end of the day, it's not just about pixel peeping. It's not just about, the spec sheet numbers. There is more to it than that. And for me, really talking about this with Stadia, I think the reason why I bring it up is because they really did try to pull the wool over everybody's eyes by kind of bringing up these specs that don't matter, like they're a massive selling point, and then them not delivering on it. That's the bit that just rubs me the wrong way, that feels disingenuous, and like it shows a real lack of respect for the customer, and in a few different ways, because it doesn't respect the customer's intelligence, and it also doesn't respect their money. And I think that really, really sucks, especially when you're asking somebody to buy into an early platform that you obviously intend to build, and yeah, you just give them a really bad early adopters deal. And look, that can work in the technology realm. I personally am the type of individual who is okay paying more money to be an early adopter for a half-baked product because maybe it's an interesting utility that does something really well that's helpful for my work life. But that is not how I and just about anyone else deals with their entertainment life. And I think Stadia absolutely is proving that. So just to wrap this up and bring it back to Doom Eternal, look, if this is what Doom Eternal is actually shooting for in Stadia, look, the game's going to look decent, absolutely, but true 4K is just apparently a ways off for the platform itself. If Stadia genuinely is a bare minimum product, then Google need to be honest about that. They need to market 4K 60 as a future goal rather than falsely claiming that it's something that is already being achieved by the things you can play on their platform. And as for it, I mean, yeah, maybe they dropped the ball, maybe it just couldn't happen with what Google gave them. Either way, it is a little bit of an embarrassing situation for everyone to be involved with. So yeah, there you go. Streaming, I mean, part of me just thinks, who cares? But then I suppose I think back to myself last weekend where, I was at home, right? I had my MacBook, which is not really a gaming rig. So using something like GeForce Now would have been a really good experience. It's kind of sad that half the games I would have wanted to play in GeForce Now are now not something I can't, I can play in GeForce Now because a bunch of publishers pulled out. But, I can see that use case for streaming. But I'll tell you what, if I'm popping home for the weekend and just want to play some games streamed, I want to play the games I already own, and I can only really do that in GeForce Now. Obviously, Stadia makes no sense in my own personal use case, and maybe that's the sort of thing that Google should also be thinking about. Anyway, with that, let me know, what do you think about that Stadia value proposition? What would actually get you using that? And what are the use cases that would actually see you using streaming for your PC games? Let me know. Thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to like, sub, and all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.